Hello and welcome to Bombshells. I'm Fleur Elizabeth.
And I'm Amy Shepherd.
And today we're joined by activist, commentator and culture warrior Lois McLatchie Miller.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So you've just come back from Dublin.
I have.
Yeah, what were you up to there?
I was speaking at the March for Life, which is a gathering of thousands of people in Ireland who want to march for women and babies. It was cool because they came off the back of a referendum that happened a few weeks ago. You guys probably heard about it, where they voted really conclusively to keep mothers upheld in the Constitution. And then so this was kind of a part two, if you like. They were standing up for women and babies against abortion and saying, actually, we can do better in our society to protect families. So it was really cool to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know a lot about this referendum.
Oh, sure.
Did you say?
Yeah.
So the referendum is pro-choice?
So it actually wasn't related to abortion specifically, but
Okay.
it was about a piece of writing within their constitution that said, well, there's two things. There was one that they tried to take women, references to women out of the constitution in certain contexts. And secondly, the constitution said that mothers should not be obliged to have to work if they are also looking after small children, and that the state should support and uphold them in their choice to do so. And they wanted to remove that because they thought it was too archaic, and a lot of activists were saying, oh, like we should, women can be girl bosses, they don't need to have this protection in the Constitution. And essentially it was kind of a rebellion against woke, I think, was the referendum result. It was really a huge victory on one side. Everybody, there was a huge percentage that voted to protect that reference to allowing women to have support to be mothers, to have their babies and not have to necessarily be in a workplace for the entirety of their parenthood. So it was a huge victory for women's rights as well, and for that kind of traditional role of a mother, and upholding that and saying that we're not over that as a society. We still have room to support women in that capacity too.
Cool, yeah. So, Lois, you've had the opportunity to work with various media outlets as a commentator. What's been the most challenging aspect of doing that when you're talking about free speech and womanhood and sort of culture war issues?
Yeah, I think a lot of us who go on TV or media, we know that we're going to get some pushback. So I think I don't have an issue with people disagreeing with me at all. I suppose some of the views that I talk about are seen as controversial in some settings, and so you can get a bit of hate mail or whatever. I don't actually get as much as you think, but I think it's really important for young people especially to be speaking about these issues in society that need to have two parts of a conversation, whether that's about gender and puberty blockers, like a lot of the headlines have been in the last 2 weeks, or it's about abortion, which is seen as a no-go zone for conversations. We need to be having that out in the open and hearing both sides of the argument. So I think it's really important work, and I encourage everyone to get involved.
Nice. Oh, so you work... So I've seen you... I think the first time I saw you was at NatCon last year in London. And I thought you gave a really oh no, my phone's going off. I think you gave a really interesting speech. Obviously you are anti-abortion, so that does get everybody talking. Sure. But you go on to... I've seen you on GB News, and you've been on Daily Wire as well. So how do you sort of cope with different perspectives in the media and going on the platforms you go on?
Because you did BBC as well.
Yeah,
so
I've been on BBC quite a few times.
Not always sympathetic platforms.
Yeah, yeah, it's very much a different experience to go on, Talk TV to GB News to BBC. Again, I'm always honoured to be asked to go on the BBC when I am, because that shows that there's still room for conversation in mainstream society. And I have to say, there's been many times that they have had me on, and I appreciate that. And we give them a hard running sometimes. It's really clear when we look across the media landscape in Europe especially, and also the UK, that there is a dominant narrative. In my country, Scotland, we have this kind of prevailing set of ideas that are espoused by the government, I suppose, It's very much in favour of censorship over free speech. It's very much in favour of not offending. We now have a law against saying things that could be interpreted as stirring up hate or being offensive, with a very heavy prison sentence of up to 7 years for those who violate. So I can see in certain countries like Scotland and others across Europe that there is this trajectory towards shutting down conversation. And whilst, I can go out in London and it will be kind of a heated debate at times, I think it's entirely worth it to allow those conversations to still be happening. The group that I work for, ADF International, we take cases, or we support legal defence of individuals who have been discriminated because of what they've said. We had a politician in Finland who just tweeted a Bible verse and challenged whether her church should really be sponsoring the Pride Parade, if that was a sensible decision. She's been on criminal trial for about 5 years as she's heading to the Finnish Supreme Court. And we've got cases in Mexico which are very similar, where politicians have actually been convicted of having committed gender-based political violence because they've tweeted their views about biology, basic.
In Mexico?
Male and female, yeah. So we can see this trajectory across the world where things are genuinely getting into the criminal realm. And I can see Scotland, Ireland heading that way in the not too distant future. So I think London still has a good culture of free speech. London still has a culture where we can have these conversations in the media. There's a lot of, there's Spectator, Unheard, Critic. There's a lot of these... Bombshells, exactly. There's a lot of alternative voices and a lot of space for conversation. So I think we should keep that open.
Yeah, so with the ADF, my understanding is that you campaign, is it a charity?
ADF UK is a charity.
It's a charity, yeah. To sort of back people, give people legal backing when they face discrimination on religious grounds, basically, is that?
Yeah,
right?
So we're mainly lawyers, and we'll give legal support to individuals who have been discriminated against.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, it was ADF that sorted out NatCon. They took it to it was them that
was exciting.
allowed NatCon to continue in Brussels, which that really did make me think London's not so bad, because
me too, honestly.
That wouldn't, it didn't happen here.
Yeah.
The worst we had was Steve Bray shouting outside.
Yeah, and it's not to say it will never happen, but I think you're right. That did for me also highlight that contrast between mainstream Europe and here. And if you look at the media coverage, in the Brussels bubble, we had headlines about, my experience eating at the far right buffet. And it was all about like the food choices of NatCon and all these kind of things, which were just kind of ridiculous when you think of what happened. This conference was shut down by a storm of police, and we had an overnight legal challenge and a verdict at 2 a.m. that the conference could go on the next day. It was an incredibly dramatic and significant international diplomatic story. And Brussels was commenting on like little joke pieces about what they ate at NatCon. But the UK media really highlighted the story, and they understood the significance of, we might not agree with Suella Braverman or Nigel Farage or whoever it is, but we can't have police coming in to shut down a peaceful gathering. That's ridiculous.
No, it's true. The fact that it was actually such a big story, and it did make quite big headlines straight away, does show that at least we have journalists that like to pick up on this kind of stuff and are switched on to the fact it actually means something. So that's good.
It's scary. Really good. That was literally 2 hours on the Eurostar, and that difference in in just the freedom. But I know that piece about the food at NatCon was totally unfair, because the catering was blocked.
It was blocked by police. I know.
They had like tuna tartare. Most of it was pretty nice.
That's quite fancy.
And we went to a few bars when we weren't working, and they put popcorn with everything. So I think that was more of a Belgian
decision. They were quite niche, aren't they?
Than a right-wing cuisine, because I've never had that anywhere else. So yeah, whoever, I think she was called Claudia that wrote that article.
Politico it was.
Yeah. Not something you'd write. You write much better things. You've been in the Wall Street Journal.
I have, yeah.
You've been in the Times.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to an aspiring writer who wants to write more sort of opinion writing and commentary to break into that world?
Oh, it's a fun question. I think one thing I've learned over the years is that you really can pitch anywhere. Like, don't hold back. Like, the Wall Street Journal was just luck.
Really?
I just sent a cold pitch, and it just happened to be about the right thing at the right time.
What was that?
I wrote about, it was when, it was during the Queen's funeral. I don't know if you remember, there was hecklers. And in Scotland, I think one of the hecklers was arrested.
I was there when that happened.
Were you?
I was on the Royal Mile,
Oh my goodness.
and I saw him get like pulled down by the police.
Really?
Yeah, it was annoying because we'd stood for 6 hours and you just wanted it to go smoothly. So
Yeah.
good on them.
Yeah, and like I wasn't supportive of heckling a funeral and of anyone's funeral, but I did think it was too far that he'd been arrested. So I wrote about that, and yeah, I think it just hit the right story at the right time. So I think if you have an expertise and a message, you know, if it's a free speech message or it's a women's rights message or whatever it is, just look every day for hooks in the media, for stories that you can just give that little spin on. And those spins, you know, if it's a unique take and you can get there early enough, that's really, I mean, it's not, this isn't probably groundbreaking advice,
No,
but
no, it's good to know though. I just wanted to go back to the ADF thing.
Sure.
So what are the biggest challenges for religious freedoms? And so it's really for Christians specifically, but do you think different religions get different treatment to Christianity? I think you know what I'm saying, but, but it's interesting to know from someone who is around this kind of stuff all the time, because we assume that we do have laws around discrimination on grounds of religion. But as I think we've seen with gender critical beliefs like that, to struggle to get that classed as a protected belief and everything. So I'm interested.
So how did the Christians do it?
Yeah, how did the Christians do it?
No, I mean, let me tell a quick story. Last year there was a lady who often acted as a charitable worker for vulnerable women in crisis pregnancies, and 1 in 5 women in this country who have abortions, they say that they did so against their will. They didn't want to. That wasn't their best choice. They just felt it was their only option. So there's a lot of pro-life charities who support women in that circumstance, say if you would like to have financial help, practical support, emotional support, whatever it is that can help, we're there to provide that for you. And many of them would send volunteers to abortion facilities to hand out leaflets about this service available to women who would like to learn more. Isabel von Spurs was a lady who was involved in this for 20 years, but in her city in Birmingham, they put a buffer zone around the abortion facility and said there you cannot express approval or disapproval of abortion in this zone, including through leafleting. She said, okay, I'm not going to pass out any leaflets. I'm going to do the least that I can do is I can just pray for these women in my head and they won't even know. So she just went and stood there imperceptibly praying, and maybe you saw the video on Twitter. She was arrested, searched, put in a police car and charged and put on trial because she had prayed silently in her head. When you think of the fact that we also have protesters every Saturday in London who explain sometimes religiously motivated beliefs, but often beliefs that are akin to incitement to violence on the streets, but they are, given ample protection. We can see a discrepancy there between the treatment of different religions, and unfortunately the government have doubled down on buffer zones, and they've actually introduced a law to roll them out across the country so that nobody can pray. We're hoping in the next few weeks that they're going to release guidance for police and prosecutors. At the moment, all the buffer zones instituted by the government would ban influencing, which is a very broad and kind of vague term. We're hoping this guidance clarifies that at least freedom of thoughts and the right to hold a consensual conversation, right? If you approached me and say, hey, can we chat about the services that are on offer? That's fair enough, right? So we're really hoping the government can double down and protect free conversation and free thought, but we really need the Home Office to have a backbone for these rights, especially when they come in kind of a Christian context.
Yeah, that was a really scary video to see, because she didn't do or say a single thing. You can't, and she was arrested for thinking. That is just so scary.
Yeah.
Which is what you spoke about in your NatCon speech.
Right.
Yeah.
In your personal life, has there been a moment or an experience that has shaped your perception on faith and like the intersection of faith in public discourse, or has really motivated you to get involved in this, or has it been more observing like what's happening in in the world and in the country?
Yeah.
Or has anything happened to you?
No, I think there's been several moments where I've seen the need for this kind of work. I actually came out of having... I studied human rights law in Brussels, of all places. And I did my master's thesis on surrogacy and the rights of the unborn in that situation, because if there's a sale of a born child, that would be illegal. But it's interesting with surrogacy, because it happens before birth, it's not illegal. So I kind of did a deep dive into that, and that got me more into that legal framework of human rights, based not on with your male, female, black, white, up, down, left, right, or born or unborn. And I think that kind of got me into the pro-life type work. But I think also I do have a great concern for our country that does motivate me. And on the abortion side, we're thinking of introducing abortion up to birth in the next few weeks in our country. That's horrific. No matter what your ideology is, I don't care if you identify as pro-life or pro-choice, abortion up to birth is horrific. And seeing the buffer zones come in, and in my home country, seeing the censorship law come in recently with Hamza Yusuf, knowing that will prevent important conversations in future about how we raise our children and how we treat those who are confused about these kinds of issues. I think all of those kind of moments have added up to kind of motivate me to be kind of committed to this.
Okay, this is quite interesting to me, because I am pro-abortion rights.
Sure.
I'm not pro-abortion. I don't think it's a good thing.
Sure.
But I do think in a civilized society, I think it benefits women to have that as an option if the scenario demands it, for women's safety and for sometimes the better to give children a good life, basically. And if they're not going to get that in the circumstances that they're going to be born into, then I believe I think does protect women to an extent. So that's where I come to it. But you're very pro freedom of speech, more kind of libertarian, would you say, or not? Or not?
I actually used to think I was libertarian.
Not quite.
We've all been on that journey.
Yeah, I know. Same. I wanted to be, and then it just doesn't quite work out like that, does it? But I just don't know how you reconcile your individual, your sort of your support for individual liberties, and then laws around abortion and making it illegal. Would you like to see that illegal?
Right. Sure. So, yeah, I understand your question. And I suppose, why do we defend any freedoms? So that the person can flourish, but we don't defend freedoms for absolutely every scenario. For example, when those freedoms start to hurt someone else. So I wouldn't punch you in the face. And if I did, I would expect to be arrested for assault, right? Because we have these freedoms that we can express ourselves, that we can engage in conversation, we can engage in argument. But those freedoms end when they start to cause significant serious harm to others. And then we have laws. And if you... there's no argument that I've ever heard that can tell me that somebody just before birth has less significance or rights or life than after birth. And so if these human rights that we have in place to protect people from getting hurt and to protect their freedoms to live also apply to me, then I can't justify them not applying to someone just because they're weaker or smaller or dependent on their mother. And so in the way that I would protect everyone else's freedom from abuse or from violence, I would protect them as well. But I'm also very clear that abortion is often framed wrongly in the press as woman versus baby. And you can either be pro-woman or pro-baby is what we're told. And I think that's nonsense. And I think that's been really damaging because I would never advocate a scenario. We have people on the extreme that say, oh, the baby's rights don't matter at all. And, there's just a clump of cells and right up to birth you can just throw them away and it doesn't matter. And that's not what you said, and that's not what most people say. But that's one extreme. And on the other hand, we have this other extreme where and I've never actually met anyone like this, but we can have this extreme where they say, oh well, the child matters more than the woman at all, and her rights and feelings and beliefs and welfare, they don't matter. What matters is the baby. And that's also wrong. We need a solution where both lives matter, where both lives are protected. And we can find solutions in society where we uphold the rights of both, and we just aren't trying hard enough because we have this silly narrative that is blocking those solutions.
It is interesting. And this year for me, the issue of surrogacy has come to the forefront of my mind, and your argument around that, I think I haven't really given it a thought in that sense, and why maybe my opinions about surrogacy and why I've got big issues with it as a sort of, it's just like a corporate it is really quite dark, I think, that basically just sort of devalues the sanctity of motherhood and what that means, and erasing what it means to be a mother and a woman, and why that's important to children, and why we shouldn't be interfering with nature basically too much. So you can basically carry over a lot of that, and make me wonder why I'm not being more critical of abortion. So that's really good to think about. But with what you said about the kind of person that might argue that you said you've never met before, the kind of person that will argue the fact that the baby's life is more important than the mother's. However, I definitely hear that coming out of the debate when men start talking about abortion, and I just kind of hear, when I've had debates and discussions with men, when we talk about abortion, I hear that come out. It's just kind of thing, even if they haven't directly said it, the way they talk about the rights of the baby, I just don't really
I've heard the other extreme from men. Like,
really?
Yeah, when I was on GB News at the weekend, someone emailed in saying, because I was the only girl on the panel, someone emailed in saying, you know, it's really bad to have 4 men shouting over a woman on the topic of abortion.
Yeah.
And one of them is a very left-wing guy who was saying that, you know, the amendment that would make it so you wouldn't investigate infanticide, basically.
Yeah.
He said that that's a good thing because if someone's investigated from a stillbirth, then that's traumatic for them. But that's just putting the rights of the mother completely
Not even rights,
over.
but just comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
at the end of the day.
It's like, oh, we won't possibly cause someone some trauma, so that. But then we don't care about the fact that if a baby has been murdered, that just goes uninvestigated. So I think men are definitely on both extremes as well.
I think what we're talking about possibly is not men, but like ideology, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to come to this question for you, which is, do you believe men have a place in this discussion when it comes to abortion debates?
Oh, 150%. I'll tell you why. Because in the 70s or 60s and 70s, when abortion was legalized and it became kind of this big topic in society, the mantra, and you'll recognize this, was my body, my choice. And that's kind of stuck with us, this kind of mantra of it's my body, my rights, I get the decision. Men don't have a place. What that has really meant is that before, when we had a more family norm in society, if a guy got a girl pregnant, he would take responsibility and say, okay, we're in this.
Yeah.
Likely he'd say, let's get married. Not in every circumstance, I get that there's some always been deadbeat guys in society. But on the whole, the expectation was that they would come together, they would form a family, they would raise this baby that they had created, and they would kind of take the responsibility and share it. With your my body, my choice, men can now say, your body, your choice, your decision, I'm out of here. And it leaves women with a responsibility that was meant to be shared. And I think that's really contributed to what we've seen in our the rise of fatherlessness across society, which is so harmful for children. And it sucks for women. And, you know, we shouldn't be the ones that are the entire responsibility here. It takes 2 to tango. And I think men have a big responsibility in healing abortion culture and standing up and taking that responsibility and be like, okay, you know, if I create a baby, I'm going to be a father and I'm going to be there and I'm going to be, you know, taking my share of the late nights and the early starts and dropping off at football and whatever these
Where
things
do you find
are.
boys like that?
I married one.
I haven't met many of those.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Didn't you met at the ADF thing, didn't you?
Yeah, we did meet through pro-life work, but I mean that's just an aside. But I think there's a lot of these guys coming through Christian circles because it is like a Christian norm, right? To have this respect for life, respect for women and babies, and to be forming families as a unit to allow everyone to flourish. So I think there is definitely a stream of that. I do worry when I look at the red pill movement. Yeah.
Same.
Because I think there's a lot of young guys who are turned off by woke, and we can all understand why, because they're saying that like men don't have a place in society, and also, by the way, they might be women. That's not an appealing message. But I worry that they turn around and who's there but, your Andrew Tates and your Pearl Davises and those who don't actually respect and uphold women and babies in society. And I think the church has a huge gap there that they can speak into and say, here's something better, here's something true, and here's something that helps men, women and babies to flourish together. And I think, there's a big need for Christian leaders to speak up more.
I think so
to that
too.
Demographic.
Because I, having come across at least a number of those kind of boys, because I'm a Christian and I have always been brought up around that kind of thing, or at least for large chunks of my life been brought up around churches and Christians, but meeting boys that have basically been turned off by woke, like you said, and they turn to more conservative, right-wing kind of pools of ideology and communities and things like that online, and then they come to the bridge of Christianity and they start sort of they haven't basically come to it for the right reason. They kind of stumble across it because it's kind of in like the Christian conservative world, and then they're not. I feel like they kind of use the Christian verse like in vain, and they pick and choose all of the things that demonize women, and they use it to sort of weaponize against like back in your box now a bit too much, rather than channel it into something positive, which is we need both men and women to embrace our differences and come together and to make a really lovely world and restore our community. So that makes me worried a lot. So you think the answer is Christian
I think
voices?
There's a gap in there that needs to be filled, because the Christian message is pro-women and pro-man, right? We're both made in God's image, and the Adam and Eve, right? We're kind of two parts of one whole, and the Bible again and again has upheld the difference between men and women, sure, but the dignity of each. Jesus reached out to the woman at the well who had been married 5 times and was outcast by her society, and no one would talk to her, not only because of those things, but because she was a woman. And he went and had that public conversation with her, and that kind of really shattered norms that disadvantaged women. So the Bible is very clear about the equal and inherent dignity of each, and the fact that they both have different roles in society is true as well. Like we conceded a lot of that during the sex revolution. We kind of said, oh, men and women are just the same as men. We are the CEOs, the girl bosses. Anything men can do, we can do better, and we don't need to have anything distinct or unique about femininity again. And I think that led on to where we are now with the trans movement, saying, well, what's the difference at all? And we kind of have to restore that feeling of difference and dignity at the same time. So there's a huge message that the church can bring that's extremely relevant to today. I think some branches of the church can be a little scared they don't realize the compelling truth that this has, and are chasing after relevancy that just agrees with the norm rather than stands out differently and says this is better for men and women and for society. So I think it takes a lot more of that, and hopefully that will encourage a true understanding when these guys and girls are looking into Christianity the first time, and not just picking and choosing bits which can fit the narrative that they want to portray.
I can absolutely understand the hypocrisy that in my what I'm saying, because I'm saying pick and choosing, but in a way I do pick and choose as well, because I am pro-choice to an extent, so that's another
We'll
thing.
get you there.
Yeah, for now, girl.
We'll keep praying for you, Amy. There is I saw a clip from a podcast where 2 guys who were both there are Christians, and they were sat saying that women that post photos of themselves online are all attention seekers, and no one should date girls like this because they just want other men's attention. And these guys both have huge social media followings, and they just post sort of controversial opinions all the time. I thought, attention seeking?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's okay when you do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was quite funny. But that is something that worries me, is that some people are using it as a tick. You know how we'd sort of complain about the left having tick boxes. You've got to be vegan, you've got to be pro-trans and pro-choice and everything. But I think some people have now think to be on the right, I've got to be a Christian, and they will post pictures of themselves visiting churches, post pictures on Easter and Christmas of them like praying. Yeah. And I'm just like, do you truly believe it? I mean, I really, really hope it's true, but Russell Brand suddenly getting baptised?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know him, so I wouldn't be able to tell.
I know, I hope it's true, but in the Thames, wouldn't be doing
I mean, fair play, like, it's brave to be baptised in the Thames. I don't know Ed Russell Brand or what he thinks.
I've been in the Thames, but like way upstream in Oxfordshire when it was lovely clean. I'm interested, it's a completely different subject, but talking about what the Bible says about the differences between men and women, do you think that women should lead churches?
That's a good question.
It's a controversial
one.
In
my personal capacity, no. Because I think there is really clearly defined roles that the Bible upholds and celebrates for men and women. And for someone to hear that and take away, she thinks that women are less worthy, would be a really bad interpretation of what I'm saying. But I think that there is set out structures, and men are called to a leadership role in the church, and a teaching role, and in terms of scripture, and that's really clear. Again, there's a lot that we have diminished in our day and age about what a woman can be. And when we hear things like women and children, women being mothers, women raising children, teaching other women, which is one of the things that they're called to be, is to lead other women in their kind of search for truth. We think that that's a weakness, but that's only because we're measuring everyone by a masculine scale of what success is. So we're hearing, they have to have the babies. No, we get to have the babies. That's freaking amazing. The strength, the female strength that it takes to birth a child, carry a child for 9 months, birth a child, and raise them, and get up at 3 a.m. When that kid is crying. That's incredible. And yet we've let that become a weakness, and that annoys me a little bit about our day.
No, that's such a good point, because I know a lot of the feminist arguments of things you can kind of relate it back to why have men always taken they've formed the mold of the way things should be. So when it comes to working and your career versus having a family, why is that seen as like so that's kind of like the male mold is just like the career, go and work. So why is that then the mold that women should also fit? Do you know what I mean? So it's
absolutely.
So
it's like the only valuable thing you can do is make money.
Right. And now we kind of have to do both. Whereas men still just have their one role.
Exactly.
But now we're trying to straddle both, because like someone needs to have the babies, and like, sorry guys, you physically cannot, as much as you want to pretend that you can. So we are kind of left doing both. And Miriam Cates has been really great on this as an MP. She's been highlighting the fact that the Conservative government have only really offered maternity benefits in terms of enticing women to get back to work really quickly. And that's kind of seems like the best policy for women, because they're like, well then they can get back to their career and like put their kids in daycare, and it'll be all
and have
great.
Someone else raise them
and pay them money,
to enjoy your child,
and don't get to know their children, which is not a sustainable vision, considering the birth rate is so low right now, and it's not pro women at all, because so many women statistically would like to spend a couple of years at home. In fact, women would like to have more children than they do. The average adult has one less than what they currently have. So if they have 2, they wanted 3. If they have 1, they wanted 2.
I want 8.
You're ahead of yourself.
I'm sure you will. You'll get there.
But if we want to be the supporting society for our future and for our generations, then we have to be empowering women to do what they want to do, which in a lot of cases is to be mothers and not be looked down upon for that.
Yeah, what you say a lot about the girl boss thing, and I know you've written about it in a really good way. Oh, what was that article? It was the girl boss coming out against was it the Little Mermaid, wasn't it? Snow White.
Oh yeah, that's right. Retiring the girl boss. Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is that the live action Snow White?
Yeah.
When she said, I haven't seen it, I just saw the interview where she said, and now because it's 2023, she doesn't fall for a prince and she doesn't need to fall in love and she just does her own thing. You're like, falling in love's nice and great, and men want to fall in love as well. It's not like
do you know what's so funny? Are you guys 50s? Do you know Taylor Swift?
I thought you said, in our 50s.
Do love Taylor
Taylor Swift?
Yeah, that's right.
I really hate her.
Oh, that's fine.
I am.
Because it's just a cultural commentary piece.
Are you actually?
I love Taylor Swift.
There you go. Sorry to your poets department. Let's talk about it for a sec. But I think that Taylor arguably represents a lot of the confusion that women have. Right, so to talk about Snow White for a second, there was a big backlash in Gen Z when she came out with those comments like, oh, Snow White doesn't have to have a charming prince. She can just go and be president. And a lot of us were like, would kind of be nice to have the charming prince, you know.
Every president wants a first lady, so why can't a female president have a...
Taylor's kind of whole image during her like 1989 era was, oh, I am on top of the world, I'm a new romantic, I'm free, I'm young, I'm on top, like I'm the girl boss. But if you listen to her most recent album, which is an incredibly sad album, there were so many references to the marriages that she had wanted. And there's like a lyric about her boyfriend at the time putting a ring on her finger as like a play pretend thing, and it was the happiest she'd ever felt. And Taylor is actually representing a lot of girls, especially young girls, who are suddenly realizing we've been told this narrative that to be a girl boss is the ultimate source of happiness and that what we should expect to want out of life. But Taylor's like 34. A lot of women are reaching mid-30s, looking around. They're not married yet. They don't have kids. Biological reality is that they don't have so much more time to get settled and to have children. And they kind of feel lied to. They're like, I did all this. Maybe I made it in my career, but a lot of women don't make it to the top of their career.
Where's my happiness?
Where's my happiness?
That I was promised.
Yeah, and I think there's a real emptiness there.
I think we're setting up women for a lot of disappointment and sadness and a lack of accomplishment, because, I mean, what is the point in going to have a stellar career if you can't come home and enjoy the fruits of your labour?
Right.
And who are you going to do that with?
Right.
And then when you clock off, like, where is your like natural purpose?
Yeah.
And for me, I know that I do really want kids and I'd love to have a family, but then coming out of the university class, I'm sure I've said this again and again and again, so sorry viewers if I've said this before, but I remember being at uni and then sitting around with all of the girls I was living with. There was a house of 6 girls and they were all very like posh and educated and like good university coming to the end of it. And we're sort of like, so what do you want to do when you're older? Like, the one person just says, oh, to be honest, one thing I really want to do with my life is get married and have kids and just have a family. And everyone goes, oh, what? Really? Oh my God, that's such a betrayal. Like, why would you do that? You're an educated woman. Like, it's kind of like, oh, what? I thought you were a feminist. Like, how dare you say that?
I had the same thing at school. When I was in an all-girls school, which was so feminist, it was crazy. Like, the only talks we would get in was people from STEM subjects. Like, you got to go and study STEM subjects to be a feminist. And so when the careers advisor was talking to us, I think when we were about 16, she said, like, what do you want to be when you grow up, Fleur? And I said, well, I want to be a mum and I'd love to be a housewife and a mum. That would be my dream. And she said, that's not an option anymore. You need to pick a real job. They also did a thing where if girls didn't go to... we had the speech day at the end of the year. And if a girl didn't go to university and she went to work for a family business, one of my friends went to work on her parents' farm, they wouldn't say that, they'd say gap year, because of course you were going to go to university and of course you were going to like have degrees and go into a graduate job. And it's just, these were female teachers trying to put a mould for us. This wasn't even men creating this. So yeah, I was just looking at Taylor Swift's worst lyrics in the Daily Mail. One of them was, "My friends all smell like weed or little babies."
Oh.
What does that mean? And this is the worst, number one worst. "You smoked, then ate 7 bars of chocolate. We declared Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist. I scratched your head, you fell asleep like a tattooed golden retriever." I've got to say, this is why I don't like it. I think she writes a load of rubbish.
It is. Yeah. I like your point on Taylor Swift though, because it goes back to what you kind of think when, like, the lady does protest too much kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You're outside being like, yeah,
mm-hmm.
oh yeah, just be a girl boss and everything's great, I'm so independent, I hate man. He ain't shit kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then just like, you don't have anyone to, like, when you close your door at the end, like when you go back in your house, you're just gonna be crying. I swear.
Well, her song in the new album, "I Can Do It With a Broken Heart," it's about that. It's like a real bop, and it's about her being on stage and being amazing and being worshipped by crowds of fans, but she's devastated and depressed on the inside because she's brokenhearted.
I think that girl boss as a reaction against traditional, like, women were oppressed in the past, and it's great that we can vote. It's great that we have the option to work. It's not that great that we have to work. But I think girl boss has been quite dangerous because it has just made women think, I don't need to be in a relationship to be happy. Mm-hmm. They're told this so much. You can be single and happy. You can be childless and happy. And then 20 years later, they're single and childless and suddenly unhappy. Mm-hmm. And it's almost too late because a lot of the men are married and you're sort of not fertile anymore and lonely, and your career isn't as fulfilling as you thought it would be. So I think a lot of it comes from TV shows like Sex and the City, female singers singing about this, and I'm very glad that I was sort of raised with more traditional values, that I didn't fall for this, because I just see so many people do, and I really hope that they realise before it's too late.
Yeah. There's a study from Yale from the 70s until like 2010 or maybe even 2015 that shows the decreasing relative and absolute happiness of women compared to men over time. And until the 70s, we were happier generally for hundreds of years than men. And then it started to decrease, and now it's super, super low, women's general happiness across the world. And I agree, because it's not like I get frustrated when like the Gen 5 models say, oh, the 1950s was perfect. It definitely wasn't. And actually before that kind of blip in time, women were using their creative skills like at home. They were having like home businesses, like the Etsy of the old days, right? They were like using their
Tupperware
homes,
parties,
or like having creating pottery or working on the farm, or like using their homes to and be a part of the economy as well, but doing it in a way that they could also look after their kids, that the workplace worked around them, and not them molding themselves into a workplace made for men. So I kind of lost my track here, but whatever you were saying, I was right.
Well, I saw something on Twitter yesterday where this girl said that, I was going to say this earlier because you said that women are measured on a male scale kind of thing. And she said the same thing. Women only celebrate for their achievements when it's in like a traditionally male arena.
When you win an Oscar or something.
And she said, I want to take this opportunity to celebrate my grandmother who like couldn't read or write, but she could crochet anything. She was the best Italian cook ever. She was Sicilian. Her house was always spotless. She raised 4 children who all went off to university despite the fact that she couldn't like read or write herself. And she said, I want to celebrate these achievements. She's not won an Oscar, she's not won a Nobel Peace Prize, but these people have
laid the groundwork, basically.
Yeah, and these women have been doing this for generations, and no one celebrated them.
So true. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Sex and the City. Carrie Bradshaw was actually a character that they created in Cosmopolitan magazine in the 70s, or maybe even the 60s. There's a really interesting book from one of the writers from Cosmo at the time. She's since kind of converted her ways and thinks about things a lot differently, and she's written a memoir, and she said they called her the Cosmo Girl. She later became Carrie Bradshaw. She wasn't real at the time. Nobody was living this life. No one was like walking around New York City sleeping around being like the boss babe. But they knew that they could attract a lot of profit from advertisers who wanted women to have this hedonistic lifestyle because they wanted to sell jewelry or makeup or whatever it was. So they created this person and then told all of their readers that they wanted to be like her until they did. But there was never really an archetype that was a genuine woman who thought that this was the best way to live. And we've all just been trying to copy this fake idea of what a woman should now be. I think that's really interesting that stayed with us for about 5 decades now.
I know. And it's like, in a way, I think we're all aware somewhere in our brains or our instincts that is not what we really want. Because how depressing is like Carrie and Big's relationship. Like, it's actually very
so
depressing.
sad,
I don't know why that's appealing whatsoever.
Yeah.
But
I think it's more like the penthouses and stuff.
Yeah. It's the glamour, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
I'm fine with that. I'd rather have a little cottage with lots of babies. Almost as unrealistic with how hard it is to have a family on one income. I went to one of these think tanks. Won't name them, but they did an event about family policy basically, and they said this was exactly what the government should do, and it was basically just make childcare free so they can go in as early as possible, and make IVF more accessible. And I thought, who was it? Siobhan Bailey, the MP, she was saying that we can't just gear family policy towards traditional family structures, but it's got to include like 2 dads, single parents, because they are just as good structures, which they can work. But if you just look at the data, the best structure for a family is a dad and a mum.
Yeah.
So it's really alarming to have the government just like lying about what works and then putting this band-aid over it with the free childcare.
Yeah, it's tinkering with the symptoms, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than getting to the root of the problem, why are women not able to have so many children?
And the babies will get attachment issues.
Yeah. So
when I worked as a nursery teacher, there was a little boy who was in 40 hours a week, which was the same that I did. And his parents were separated, and his mum had actually both of his parents had really high power jobs. One of them was always travelling, one of them was always working, so often it was his grandparents picking him up. So he saw me more than he saw anyone. And he would cry when he would get picked up to go home, because he was going with someone that he didn't really know that well.
Yeah.
And it would absolutely break my heart, and I just thought, I wish I could take you home.
Yeah, I know. Because I think a lot of the issues with adults in their mental health come from abandonment and fear of abandonment. I think somebody said that's the whole thing of basically birth is the first like abandonment thing, and then everything else is just like more abandonment for like risk of abandonment. So just having like a really good connected family unit and being like close, spending time with your mother is so important. And I would argue your actual mother, not just a surrogate. I think there is nothing better. But
I don't want to sound like I'm judging, because there are circumstances that happen outside of people's control. But we've got to be honest about what the ideal is.
Yeah.
And what works.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's always hard when you've got issues like this, not just how to talk about them in public, but how to figure out your own beliefs and navigate that in your own mind. Like, what do I really think about surrogacy? You've got to work through it. So if you come across a new issue, something that's current or like trans issues didn't exist. I know they've existed for all of eternity, but
Except they have.
but it's come into our awareness more recently. So when new issues come up, how do you? What's your process of finding out what your stance is on something?
Okay.
Before you go into the commentary about it.
I think a good rule of thumb when it comes to family issues and kind of reproductive technologies is this doing something that prioritizes the wishes of adults, or is it doing something that's best for the child? And so a good kind of contrast of that is adoption and surrogacy. So in adoption, something awful has gone wrong. That's the starting premise. Like something beyond our control has happened and we need to fix it, and we require parents to step in and to help heal this wound that has been caused to this baby. And it's not an ideal situation, but this is the ideal solution. And we can help the baby heal and flourish in that capacity. So the adoption puts the child's needs ahead of what's maybe convenient for an adult. Surrogacy is actually the opposite. Because in surrogacy, adults plot that a harm will be inflicted on a newborn baby. I don't know if you saw, even last night on Twitter, there was a clip of a newborn baby being placed on the chest of a man pretending to be his mother.
Oh, it makes me feel sick.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
I've seen this happen a lot with Paris Hilton.
This was a man with long plaits.
Oh god, no, that's even worse in my opinion.
I mean, so what we're doing to the child is severing them from the mother that they know, and potentially, if we're using donor gametes, from their parents that they should also have a right to know where they come from, to know, and we're severing that connection, and it's the person responsible is then for the trauma is then saying, okay, I'm going to heal this trauma, which the intention, number one, is wrong, and number two, that's going to be very difficult as the child grows up to if they want to have a conversation about that, who are my real parents, that adult is going to have to at some point take responsibility and say, I'm the one that took you away from your real parents. That's tough. That's a really tough family dynamic. So as a rule of thumb, I don't know if I haven't worked this out over every issue I've ever come across, but if it's putting a child's interest above an adult's, putting a victim above somebody who just wishes that they were something or that they had something, I think that's right. And we can have sympathy, of course. I have sympathy for a lot of them, sympathy for people who want to have kids and can't. But I think this is the wrong way to go about it, and I think adoption is a much better way.
Interesting. Yeah, I try and think, when I come to issues, I go, how does this affect women? And also, how does this affect nature, and how much are we fiddling with nature as a way to kind of understand, like, just because I can't see any downsides to doing something, if that's fiddling with nature works for a reason. Just because I can't see the downsides doesn't mean they're not going to exist or they're not going to come later. So are we fiddling with nature too much for the sake of it, and we're just sort of turning a blind eye to any of the things that might come down the line? So
it's definitely easier as a Christian, because you always think, well, God made it this way, so that's why I trust it.
It does give you a boost.
It must be harder if you don't have that sort
framework.
of
I suppose you could just go back to your basic. If you're not a Christian, a lot of people still believe in human rights, which, by the way, are Christian. But the basic framework of human rights that was kind of cultivated into law after the Second World War has basic principles about, from everything from the Ten Commandments, like do not kill, all those kind of things, to does this children have a right to actually have a codified right to know and be loved by their parents. But you can go back to a lot of those principles that are codified from the early days of human rights legislation and say, how does this compare to this vision for human flourishing that came out of tragedy to today, where we don't have maybe that anchoring in what a human right is in our daily discourse, but how does this impact what the laws were that were set up to protect every human being?
Right. Before we wrap up the free version of this episode, something really big is happening in the next couple of weeks. There's going to be a vote on amendments to the criminal justice bill. So could you just quickly explain what's going on, what people can do?
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. Well, our politicians will have a few options over how they want to amend our abortion law in the UK for the first time in 50 years. So this is a really huge historic moment. So there's 2 amendments that would push abortion law up to a more extreme level. Currently, we sit at 24 weeks for most abortions. That's already double the European average, which is 12 to 15 weeks. So UK is already a country that allows abortion to a much later stage. It's almost 6 months of a baby. It's a significant bump in there and a significant human being. So some politicians want to push that all the way up to 40 weeks if a woman is performing it by herself. Now, this is madness from a women's rights perspective because it is incredibly dangerous for a woman to be performing an abortion on herself, especially at that late stage. And decriminalising it is going to remove protections that prevent women from taking this on and from performing an abortion on themselves. So absolutely hideous. Our laws should be protecting women and babies, not putting them in danger. But
it's already 7% of women end up in hospital to have a further procedure after doing an at-home abortion.
Yeah, no, it's horrible statistics. And anyone who has any respect for women, no matter their ideological background, should be encouraging their MP to vote against this because it's horrific. There is good news, though. There's 2 other amendments that are much more positive from both the woman and baby's perspective, because we want to uphold both. One would take the abortion limit, which currently is 24, down to 22. It might seem like a small jump. It is a small jump, but it's a small jump in the right direction because babies can now survive outside the womb at 22 weeks. There's no reason why a hospital should have one ward where a baby's being aborted. The same age of baby is being helped to survive outside the womb. If a child can be born alive, let's give them every opportunity to survive and thrive with the right support. So it's an amendment that's in line with medical advances and with the current technology that we have to support babies. And the other one would protect babies with Down syndrome who are currently allowed to be aborted up to 40 weeks, and that would bring them down to be at the same level with their peers as well. So a very equality focused amendment. So to be clear, to recap, there's 2 good amendments, 2 bad amendments. Write to your MPs. Let them know about the horror that is happening. We do not want abortion up to birth. We want safer and more humane laws, like bringing the abortion limit down to 22 weeks, that will help both woman and child to thrive.
Yeah, and it's if you think that you're on your own, only 1% of women actually want abortion up to birth. So
right,
it's not a
very few British people really want abortion up to birth. This is out of touch.
70% want it lowered.
Indeed.
So there we go. That's a good thing to end it on. Something for you to do. But thanks for watching the free version of this episode of Bombshells. If you would like to watch the premium extended version, go to basedmedia.org, where you can subscribe for as little as £5 a month. So thanks, Lois.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.